Shalom and welcome back. This is going to be lesson number 11 and learning biblical Hebrew. Let's start out with our sentence and let's begin. Vayetz'u lelechet, and they went to go, arza, toward the land, Canaan of Canaan. Vayevu, and he came, arza, toward the land, Canaan of Canaan. Alright, so now let's start breaking apart once again our Hebrew sentence so that we can identify all of the things that we need to do. Alright, first off, let's look at the word vayetza, vayetzu. So vayetzu, alright, we know that this is here the Vav conversive. As you can see in this book, the Vav conversive is one of the major ones that you just hit off in the very beginning. And why is this? Well, one thing you have to understand, the Vav conversive is not something that you would ever utilize in speech, but it's something that you would use in written form. It's kind of the major difference between how you would write in English versus speak in English. If we were to say this same sentence here, we would not say vayitzu if I was to be speaking, okay? I would literally say tsa'u, and that would be the past tense form of they went forth. Hem yatsu, alright? Hem yatsu, they went forth. That's what I would be saying in my actual spoken form. Where here we have vayitzu, okay? So vayitzu is what we have used here. So now we have to identify, real quickly, the pronoun. So we know that the yud is the pronoun, right? Which leaves me with 3 letters left. Tzadik, Aleph, Vav. One thing is very simply easy to figure out, and what's that? Vavs are never ever the last letter of a verb. Just understand that. Never the last letter of a verb when it comes to roots. Okay? Vav is always going to be a pronoun character that we find attached to roots. So we know that we don't have 3 root letters here. Okay? So we'd have to literally say the identification of the yud and the vav tells me that we're dealing with the third person plural, okay? So that's the third person plural. So what I have left, if I erase my vav, it's tzadik and aleph. So tzadik and aleph are the 2 ones that I have left. Now, we remember that we went through the actual drill by which we said, what are the ways that we can possibly pull out a root? I'll list these in detail once again. Number 1, I could add a nun to the tzadik. Number 2, I can add a yud to the tzadik, and that would encompass my first 2 root letters that can be attached to the root tzadik aleph. The second thing I could do is I can add a vav or a yud to the middle of this root, by which that would indicate my middle 2 letters by which I can place in the middle. The last, I can either double the aleph or I can put a hey at the end. And that would give me my 6 possibilities by which I could find the root. But here, we're going to learn a little trick. If you see a tzireh that's used underneath the yud, you can identify this as predominantly being that the first yud is actually missing in the root. Therefore, this teaches us that the root is actually yud tzadik aleph. Yud tzadik aleph. Okay? Yud tzadik aleph tells me, when I'm utilizing this, that I have now a weak verb, right? Why? Because yud drops off and is one of the weak roots by which I have to utilize this verb chart that uses the first yuds, which drop off. There are two types of yuds that we're going to find that are always utilized in our verbs. Number one, we have strong verbs with yuds, and we have weak verbs with yuds. A weak verb is right here. Yud, tzadik, aleph. A strong verb would be like, for example, Yud, Resh, Aleph, which means to be afraid or to fear. This kind of fear that this is referring to, the Yud, Resh, Aleph, is the fear by which is a reverential fear. Okay? The fear that which would be considered like I'm scared out of my mind, like frightened, is the word pachad. Okay? Which here would be pet, chet, daled. Pachad. Right? A little extra work to kind of think about, to know the differentiation between two types of fear that we find in the actual written Torah or in the Hebrew language. Okay? So here, that being the case, what is yatzah? Yatzah means to go out. So here I know that I have to say they, because I have the yud and the vav, which indicates the third person plural. They went out. Now I want to teach a little trick here because of what we're going to find here in the next. With the vav narrative, you can always do this. You can say a vav narrative statement and add another vav narrative statement. And he went out, and he ate, and he drank, and he slept, and he woke up, and he went to study Torah. Okay? Here, whenever we have a verb that's not a vav narrative, okay, which is what we would be looking for in this kind of a situation. Either we're going to have a vav narrative, by which the vav converse will be used, or we're going to see the vav conjunction, by which the next verb that's going to be placed after it will be a past tense, which would be a normal past tense verb, excuse me. And that's what we'd be looking for when we're looking for kind of like a narration. And he sat, and he ate, and he drank, and he made coffee, alright? That's the narration, alright? Outside of narration, we have an issue by which this is how it's going to work. If I find a verb ever after a regular verb, it's always going to be in the infinitive. Always, okay? So, by that being said, you can identify the fact that the question you might have is, what is this? Okay? So we have to understand that lalechet is what we call the infinitive. Now, what we need to understand about infinitives is going to be very important, okay? Because we have three forms of infinitives. We have an absolute, and we have a construct state of infinitive, and then of course we have the lamed preposition that's attached to the actual root, which is in the infinitive state. And this is where we get the word to. Okay? And I want you to think about this because this is important, because when you're thinking about infinitives, infinitives just mean ongoing action. Okay? If I was to say, he went going to the school and fell down. Okay? That would mean I was using the absolute verb state. What does that mean? That means instead of using this lamed in the front, I only used the actual verb form by which the letters that are required for my absolute state to be used would only be visible, and therefore it's expressed in infinitive without the word to. And I just briefly want to mention this so that you can understand the difference between an infinitive verb that has the to versus an infinitive form without the lamed preposition. So lalechet. Lalechet is the word basically halach. So notice here in the state, the hey disappears, and what we have is we have a tav that's used at the end. Alright? And this is very special because halach is its own special class of verbs. Okay? It doesn't follow the typical stance when we're talking about verbs. Because typical verbs, we'll see, will carry all the roots predominantly in the actual infinitive form. Here we only have two root letters, and we have to add the tav at the end for this. So this word means to go. To go. Alright? Vayitzu, and they went. Lelechet, to go. Artza. What is artza? Artza is, I need to rewrite this thing here, I didn't mean to do that. Artza is the word eretz. Aleph, resh, tzadik. Eretz. What's happened to eretz is we've added an hey at the end of it. This hey, you might question and ask and say, is this a pronoun? Because remember, the ones that I gave you earlier in the other video, is I said there are basically three things that you're going to see attached to nouns. You're going to see the definite article, for example, ha, which is for the, or you're going to see a preposition, for example, ba, as in ba'eretz, or you could see a pronoun. In this case, there's a fourth one we have to add. And this one is going to be the hey directive. So here the tzadik, because this is no longer the ending, it's going to go inside the word itself, we have to add the kamatz underneath it, and we're going to put this in the construct state. So you have artza, and artza, this is called the hey directive. What does the hey directive do? We talked about this some, and saying how the L is used for verbs of speech in relation to the direction of movement as well as the direction of movement as well as the goal. Okay, the goal of the actual direction. All right, he went to Jerusalem. Okay, not going towards Jerusalem, he went to Jerusalem. So Jerusalem was the goal by which he went. Okay, Jerusalem was the place by which he was seeking to go and be at. So therefore he's at Jerusalem. Okay, here the hey directive is always going to be translated as movement. Okay, where if I was to say the same sentence, Vayitzu lelechet artza Canaan, and he went to go toward, so here we're going to put toward. Now I have to say Canaan is a name, so here we're going to put Ka-nan, alright? Or actually, let's add the other Canaan, because that's actually how it's pronounced. So this would be toward the, because remember, in a noun construct, which is, you can do this to noun constructs, is here, Eretz and Canaan is a noun construct. So Eretz is land, Canaan is a name. Alright? So here you'd have to put toward the land, And here you'd have to put in front of kanan, you'd have to put the word of. And remember, our noun constructs, remember I told you, they're the of statements that we use all throughout our English. Like, he had a bowl of milk. He had a cup of tea. That's your noun construct. So here, Arza means toward the land of Canaan. Now, how could I retranslate this in Hebrew, by which I don't want to talk about the direction of movement, I want to talk merely in relationship to the goal of the movement. Not the direction, but the goal, okay? In this case, I would have to leave Arza and read it as no longer Arza, but as Eretz. So Eretz here, I would say lelechet, and then I would have to add el, Eretz Canaan. He went to the land of Canaan. And this is why it's so important to notice the difference between el and the hey directive. Because when you're reading the Bible, you're saying to yourself, and this is what a lot of grammarians have failed in dramatically, because when they wrote these grammar books, they said, well, the hey directive and the el preposition, they have the same meaning. That doesn't make any sense. You don't use two grammatical forms and say they mean exactly the same in a language. There's always a differentiation between one form and another, okay? Always. It's just like in English, what's the difference between to and toward? They're not the same meaning. There is a slight variance between the two. One means the direction of movement, one means the goal of the movement. In Hebrew, the hey directive is the direction of movement. The el is the goal of the movement when dealing with verbs of movement. When dealing with verbs of speech, el does both jobs. It does both the job of the direction of movement as well as the goal of movement. So there's going to be a lot of interpretation that you'd have to seek as to say, well, does it mean toward or does it mean to? Because that's going to define the differentiation between how you would translate that one statement. So here, Arza, toward the land of Canaan. Okay? So toward is what we're going to have to remember. Even though the hey is at the end, we're going to put toward before we start talking about the actual noun here. Okay? And of course, Canaan is a name. And so we're just going to use of Canaan because it's a noun construct. So don't forget of when you're doing this, because it's very necessary, because this indicates that this is the noun construct. Now we have Vayivo. We learned that in last lesson. We have here the Vav conversive. So we know that this is the Vav conversive. We know that this is the pronoun. And we know that bo is the root, because that's what you used in last lesson. So, and he came. And he came where? This means that in this statement here, we have a, whatever you want to think about, the differentiation between like a verb that expresses an action by which there's no object in a sense, then you're going to find that the object of the sentence here is going to be what we call either a transitive verb or an intransitive verb. All right? So what's a transitive verb? All right, now I want to just jump into this thing real quick before we finish this off, because it's important to understand this. A transitive verb versus intransitive. A transitive verb is always going to require an object. He threw a ball at something, right? Because it's affecting. It's the thing that's affected in the sentence. It's the object in the sentence. at the wall. So the wall is the indirect object, okay? And when we have an intransitive verb, we're talking about mere statements that say something like, he ate. There is nothing that completes any new special understanding about what his action was. It's merely a pure, simple statement of an action that was done, and that in itself completes the actual subject. So, going back here, Vayivo, and he came. He came, what? Arza, toward the land. Because why? Because Eretz is made definite by the word Canaan. So we have to put down here of Canaan. So when we're looking at these things, I want you to understand, I know even though this is a little on the difficult side, the word lalechet, and I have to give it to you what it is, because of the fact that it doesn't follow the typical patterns that we're going to find in the Pa'al form and the typical patterns that we'll find in like the PL form, which we've only covered two forms so far, Pa'al and PL. We're going to see the fact that, we have to also memorize and know what are the special forms for verbs that are used in the infinitive. And this is just going to really help us understand what it is, but we have to realize the importance about the fact of identifying what these are. So we know that this is a verb, this is being used in the infinitive form. Infinitive means ongoing action. And you're typically going to find your verbs, when you're dealing with the lamed in front, this is always going to be the two verbs, okay? To walk, to sing, to run, to see, to lie down, to slow down, to do quickly, to do it. You're going to find it's always the to, and of course the verb statement. And this should really help you understand when you're utilizing these things, the different rules that you're going to find. Whenever you have a verb that's not going to be in connection to the narration, it's always going to be infinitive. So just remember, vayitzu, and if the thing is not a narration verb, you should know that if this is a verb, it's always going to be infinitive. Plain and simple, okay? That's the rule of verbs. That one verb, when placed after another verb, is always going to be required to be in infinitive form. Unless it's a narrative form, by which you're going to see the word and is always going to be accompanied in front of the actual verb. So, this is the end of lesson 11. I'll see you next time as we go to lesson 12 and learn more of Biblical Hebrew.